Chapter 1. The Fall from Grace. The streets of Lagos throbbed with the chaotic rhythm of the night, okadas weaving dangerously between honking danfos, hawkers shouting about snacks and cold water, and the damp scent of uncollected refuse hanging like a second skin in the air. For most people, the rain was a curse. But for Bassey, it was the only thing that washed away the shame clinging to his soul. 2 years ago, Bassey had been one of Nigeria's most promising investigative journalists. He had integrity in a sea of corruption, and his words were sharp enough to wound the powerful. His stories shook the core of government buildings and corporate boardrooms. But nothing prepared him for the price of truth. It started with a 3-month undercover investigation into a child trafficking network linked to Senator Godswill Ayagbeni. The piece was explosive. Headlines screamed, public outrage surged, and the senator was arrested, only to be released days later. Bassey was threatened. His editor was bought off. Then came the smear campaigns, the lawsuits, and finally the blacklisting. His savings vanished into legal fees. His apartment was raided under the guise of a tax audit. Friends stopped answering his calls. What had once been a glowing career dimmed into obscurity and silence. Tonight, Bassey wandered into Oberland with nowhere to go. His jeans were soaked, and his thin jacket did little to shield him from the downpour. He held on to a battered duffel bag and his old Nikon D3200, his last vestige of dignity. He stumbled upon a pale blue building with a neon sign that buzzed more than it glowed, Eden Lounge. A misnomer if there ever was one. Bassey had heard whispers about it during past investigations. Cheap drinks, cheaper bodies, and the unspoken rule that what happened inside never saw the sun. He hesitated. Then he knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a plump woman in her late 50s, her skin slick with sweat, lips painted blood red, and a mountain of tribal marks across her cheeks. She held a beady cigarette between her fingers. "What are you looking for here, young man?" she asked, her eyes scanning him. "My name is Bassey, he said, voice shaking. "I need work. Or shelter. I can clean. Fix things. Just 10 days. She puffed smoke and leaned against the doorway. "Journalist?" Bassey flinched. "Used to be." She smirked, then exhaled slowly. "Everyone falls one day. Come inside. 10 days. No trouble." And just like that, he entered the belly of a world he had only written about. Inside, Eden Lounge pulsed with dim red lights and the scent of stale perfume. The hallway led into a smoky bar filled with a few lonely patrons nursing cheap whiskey and emptier hearts. Music thumped through old speakers mounted on sagging walls. The air was thick with weariness. The madam, who introduced herself as Madam Ruth, led Bassey through the back of the lounge into a cluttered room filled with cleaning supplies, old mops, and a cot barely wide enough for a single person. "You'll stay here," she said. "You sweep by morning, clean by midday, and don't ask questions at night. No camera. No pen. No voice." Bassey nodded. "I understand." The next morning, his first task was to mop the main floor. He woke to the sound of heels clacking above and muffled laughter seeping through the thin ceiling. He washed his face in a cracked sink, changed into a faded polo shirt, and got to work. The girls stared at him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Some were barely out of their teens, others older but just as tired. They went by names like Sapphire, Candy, Lola, and Amara. It was Amara who noticed him most. She was different, quiet, watchful, always sitting apart when the others laughed too loud. Her beauty was understated, regal even. Skin like bronze, hair tied in thick braids, and eyes that looked like they had seen more than her age should have allowed. That evening, Madam Ruth called him into her office. "Amara says you're respectful," she said, flipping through receipts. "Don't fall in love. Don't ask where they came from. Just do your job." "I'm not here for trouble," Bassey replied, though he knew deep down he was already drowning in it. Each night, he watched stories unfold. Women broken by men. Men broken by shame. Deals exchanged for bodies. Whispers of missing girls, of bribes, of violence too raw to report. The journalist in him stirred. His hands itched to document, to tell the world what it refused to see. But for now he kept quiet. 10 days. Just 10 days. Then on the 5th night he found Amara crying in the hallway, her dress torn and blood on her lip. "Who did this?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She looked up slowly. You already know who. It was the moment everything changed. No more observing. No more silence. Bassey would either expose Eden Lounge or be buried with its secrets. Bassey spent the 6th day in a haze of worry and guilt. Every corner of Eden Lounge echoed with muffled laughter and fake pleasure, yet underneath it all was a raw current of fear. He watched Amara from afar. Her bruises had darkened, and though her lips curled in fake smiles for clients, her eyes remained hollow. He approached her cautiously as she leaned against a cracked wall behind the building, cigarette smoke curling through the dusk air. You don't have to go back in there tonight, Bassey said softly. Amara laughed, bitter and tired. And go where? This is my jungle, Bassey. At least here I know what monsters I'm dealing with. He didn't reply. Instead, he showed her his camera. I want to document the truth. Your story. The others. Get you out of here. She stared at him for a long time. That's why you came. To save us. I came to save myself, he admitted. But now I can't ignore what I see. She exhaled slowly, flicking ash to the ground. If you try, they'll kill you. And me. And every girl here who ever looked at you kindly. That night, Bassey began secretly recording. He fixed old wires into the walls, planted a microphone under the bar counter, and tucked his Nikon into a maintenance panel in the hallway ceiling. The 8th day brought consequences. Madame Ruth summoned him. You're too curious, she said, her voice quiet and dangerous. I warned you. Bassey didn't flinch. I clean. I don't speak. I follow rules. She stepped closer, the heavy scent of lavender oil suffocating. Then remember that silence is safety. And loyalty is survival. As he turned to leave, he spotted a tall, sharply dressed man entering the lounge. His face was familiar. Chief Adateo, a former commissioner, long suspected of running trafficking rings. He embraced Madame Ruth like an old friend. Bassey now knew. Eden Lounge wasn't just a brothel. It was a nexus of political corruption. Bassey's heart raced as he tucked his camera's memory card into a hidden pocket inside his sock. Chief Adateo's presence confirmed everything he feared. Eden Lounge wasn't just a den of sin. It was a keyhole to the deepest rot in society. And now Bassey had evidence. He couldn't sleep that night. Amara sat next to him in the supply room, her head resting on his shoulder. Do you have a plan? She asked. He nodded slowly. There's a freelance editor I trust in Abuja. I just need to get this footage to him. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. You really think this will change anything? No, he whispered. But it will be a start. On the 7th night, Bassey snuck out of the brothel, slipping into the darkness of Oberland with a hoodie pulled low. He mailed a flash drive to the editor using an old contact's address. Every step felt like walking on a minefield. When he returned, he found chaos. Candy was gone. Word was she'd tried to run. Her things were torched in the backyard. The other girls were quieter than usual. No one said what happened, but the blood on the back steps said enough. Amara refused to talk for hours. Then finally she said, I want to leave. With you. He held her hands. We'll make it out. Just 3 more days. Day 9 was different. Something in the air had changed. Madame Ruth's eyes followed Bassey too closely. He felt watched, marked. Then the power went out. The entire lounge plunged into darkness. Bassey was fixing a broken fan when he heard a shout from upstairs. He raced toward the sound, dodging broken chairs and stumbling over shattered glass. It was Amara. She was being dragged by 2 bouncers. Her face was bruised, but she fought like hell. Without thinking, Bassey grabbed a broken bottle from the bar and lunged. He slashed at the larger man's arm, causing him to release her. She scrambled up, blood on her cheek and terror in her eyes. They ran. Through the narrow kitchen. Through the broken window in the back. Into the streets of Lagos. Behind them, voices roared. Bullets followed. But they didn't stop. They found shelter in an abandoned kiosk near the 3rd Mainland Bridge. Amara sobbed quietly. Bassey wrapped his arms around her and said nothing. Words couldn't erase what they had survived. By morning, Bassey's phone buzzed. A message from his editor friend. Got the files. Publishing today. Within hours, the story exploded. Sex trafficking network linked to top officials. Inside Lagos' darkest brothel. A journalist's undercover nightmare. Police raids followed. Protests ignited. Madame Ruth vanished. A week later, Bassey and Amara stood outside a modest safe house in Abuja. She held his hand tightly. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "You saved me first." Weeks passed since the raid. Bassey and Amara found solace in each other's company inside the small two-room bungalow in Abuja. Their nights were quiet, but full of meaning. Over cups of ginger tea and soft-spoken conversations, they learned to breathe again. Amara began painting. Each stroke on her canvas was a release, images of fire, cages, and then open skies. Bassey wrote again too, not for headlines but for the soul. He penned her story, raw and unflinching, weaving it into a memoir of resistance and resilience. One evening, they sat on the balcony watching the sun melt into the horizon. "I don't think I know what love is," Amara confessed, her voice low. Bassey turned to her. "Maybe it's not something you know. Maybe it's something you feel when your soul starts to heal." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "And you? Do you love me?" He reached for her hand and held it to his chest. "More than I fear losing you." Their kiss was slow. A promise. A reckoning. In time, they launched the Lantern Project, a grassroots initiative that offered legal aid and therapy to women rescued from brothels. Amara painted murals on the center's walls, bold, bright, defiant. Bassey trained survivors to tell their own stories. Their love didn't come with fireworks. It grew in the quiet spaces. In healing. In rebuilding. In the daily decision to choose one another. And though the world had nearly broken them, they found light in each other.